It was 0 to 60 right from the jump. The sense that ICE is this extrajudicial, unaccountable, undertrained, hyperviolent force that could overreact towards anyone at any time, and 48 hours later you're in a detention center in Texas and no one knows where you are, was present. I kept joking that they must be getting paid by the tear gas canister. The looseness with which they are tossing tear gas into crowds of civilians with whistles was sort of mind-bending. I was falling asleep hearing horns and whistles in my head that weren't there anymore. The sense of being in this sort of constant state of alertness felt really unique, and I think really speaks to like the experience that people in that community are having of constant vigilance.
My friends are saying it's the most joyous and traumatizing time they've ever experienced.
100%. And that's the other part of the story that I think I was really glad the Atlantic made a point of documenting, was this huge emphasis on this sense of solidarity in the community.
Today, I'm here with the first episode of Remote Viewing from Wrong Side of the Lens. My name is Josh Johnson, and I'm here with Jack Califano. I almost butchered your name. Maybe I was subconsciously trying to pronounce it Italian. I recently just got turned on to Jack's work through the Atlantic, his work shooting ICE in Minneapolis and the ICE raids, and his fantastic work there, and has since been kind of blown away with the work he's been doing elsewhere, which we want to talk more about in this conversation. Welcome to Remote Viewing.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here. I just got back from Minneapolis yesterday, so I'm feeling like the work is fresh in my mind and really excited to have a conversation about it.
Yeah, so just tell me a little bit about yourself, your background, like how you kind of got to become a photojournalist. I know you said you're only a year into it, and we should tell the audience that we really only talked for 5 minutes before this. This is the first time we're ever getting to know each other, and we kind of did that intentionally because we wanted to save the conversation. But maybe just broad strokes. Where are you from? Did you go to school for photojournalism?
So I'm from Baltimore, Maryland, originally. Grew up in the suburbs there. My first exposure to photography was in high school. I went to a pretty hippy-dippy high school that had like a full dark room and figure drawing classes, and I think I took one black and white darkroom photography class in high school and, liked it, but I wouldn't say, it wasn't like a love at first sight thing. I was really more of a painter, and I wanted to go to art school for painting. But my parents would not allow it. So I ended up going to a liberal arts college in New York, Sarah Lawrence. And, I ended up coming back into photography kind of totally by accident. I could not get into a painting class I wanted to get into, and signed up for an intermediate photography class with Justine Kurland, which was like the best stroke of dumb luck I've ever had. She's an absolutely unbelievable photographer, and a really sort of wonderful teacher. And she has like a very irreverent and direct approach to photography and academia. And I was sort of a bit of a wayward brat in college. I was not the best student, but for whatever reason, just was totally charmed by her and the work. And that was really my first sort of like love affair with photography. That was my first real exposure to like all the hits, like, Cartier-Bresson and Robert Frank and Gary Winogrand.
Sure.
And, I was like every other 18-year-old who discovers photography, where like you see the Americans once and you're like, okay, that's the greatest thing that's ever existed.
Right.
And I want to do it. But my interest in college was definitely, I'd say 50% politics and 50% fine arts and photography. And to me, I was really, I think my appreciation for photography started as like a fine art pursuit, and that was my interest in it. And photojournalism seemed like a sort of practical marriage of my interest in picture making and fine arts and my desire to like be involved in American politics. But all the work I made there was pretty apolitical. It was very, I sort of cringe to think about the work you make when you're like 19 years old, but
Sure.
It was a lot of like,
through the magic of curation, we don't have to show it.
Yeah, I know.
So you came out of college really with that as an ambition, photojournalism specifically, or just photography?
Photography, and I, naively at 19, I thought photojournalism was a practical career that one could make money in, which, any photojournalist will quickly tell you is not the state of the industry whatsoever.
You mean you can't live off of $350 a day?
I know. It's unbelievable, but I've always been drawn to like the theater of politics. Like, I think it's like, especially American politics over the last 10 years has been this just sort of global circus that no one can look away from.
That alone, we could probably talk for an hour about this idea of theater or aesthetics or appearances of images and the, for lack of a better word, the propaganda for better or worse. I don't mean that necessarily as a bad thing.
Yeah, totally.
Part of my interest in photojournalists is this idea of objectivity or subjectivity. Are you bringing your own preconceived notions or politics, you bleeding heart liberal, it's like, how do you leave that at the table and not bring that with you? But your recent project, spending 3 weeks, you just got back yesterday, you said it was 3 full weeks, wasn't it?
Yes.
In the cold of Minneapolis, which I might have told you, and the audience should know that I lived in Minneapolis for 12 years. I've been in New York for 16, so it's been a little while, but I still have a lot of friends. So I feel very closely interested and connected to this, as does everybody else, because it's rippling through all of the world. I mean, everyone's paying attention to the thread of the little threads of American democracy is hanging by Minneapolis right now. So when I saw your work just a week ago, I thought, oh, this is an incredibly exciting that someone's bringing some of these like artistic sensibilities to photojournalism, to an event that he could get killed for, or at least pepper sprayed or beaten up or sent to Guantanamo Bay for. And I have a million questions about that. So what was your experience? Big picture, like have you had time to process it even?
Yeah, well, I haven't had much time.
So.
It was 0 to 60 right from the jump. My friends there had been involved in Ice Watch and community patrol for several weeks, and first day we hop in the car, and the term they use in Minneapolis is commuting, where you drive your car and follow ICE agents to sort of alert other community members to their presence. And we were like, within 2 hours on day one, in the car, in a caravan of like 5 vehicles, following 3 ICE SUVs. ICE is blowing every other red light. I think I watched this caravan of like 10 vehicles total blow 30 red lights on day one. And like, I just dove right in. Like, the network in Minneapolis is so robust, this Ice Watch network. And for me, like the most striking thing that I think people need to experience firsthand to understand just how singular and different it is that community network and this sort of system of dispatching local observers to follow ICE.
Your photos are so close at times, and you're hitting them with a flash, which is this added level of potentially perceived aggression, and they don't seem to respect press. If I could make broad generalizations about what I've seen from afar, did you have conversations with the agents, or did you just try to be a fly on the wall?
It really varies. I think I'll say this, I photographed a lot of like protests in New York with NYPD, and, I've been around police, and since, I lived through George Floyd, the sense that ICE is this extrajudicial, unaccountable, undertrained, hyperviolent force that could overreact towards anyone at any time. And, 48 hours later, you're in a detention center in Texas and no one knows where you are, was present. And, I've had an NYPD officer like grab me by the scruff of the neck and push me out of this way. This felt like a different beast. And 2 observers were shot and killed in the 3 weeks I was there. I think I knew that a little bit intuitively, but like I remember the Wall Street Journal, an editor at the Wall Street Journal called me and was like, have you been like formally trained to work in conflict zones?
Yeah.
And I was like, no. And they're like, okay, we can't hire you.
Wow. So you went and crashed on your friend's couch on kind of your own dime without even a publication, no assignment. And then did you send some photos out to the world and send some feelers out and be like, hey, I'm here? And Wall Street Journal was like, can't touch you. The Atlantic was like, sounds good to me.
Yeah. I definitely, the first probably 4 days, I just shot for my, I had no assignment.
Yeah.
My goal was to shoot as much as possible and let editors know I was on the ground. After the first day, I sent out a big batch of work to maybe a dozen editors. And by the end of the 3 weeks, like, I was turning editors down who were like, are you still there? Can you be on assignment for us? And I had committed to other ones. And the global interest too, like there was a Flemish paper that wanted my work that I ended up licensing with. And it was a very bizarre experience of like the organizing is so hyper local and it's so neighborhood based. And when I arrived, I didn't understand, like I just knew my friend lived in this neighborhood and I had no conception that it was like the neighborhood. To finish answering your first question, the question of how to navigate interacting with these guys, it did feel different. I kept joking that they must be getting paid by the tear gas canister. The looseness with which they are tossing tear gas into crowds of civilians with whistles was sort of mind-bending. And, they're really kind of over-equipped.
Just the numbers. I've heard actual police officers and police chiefs say, we can apprehend someone with 1 or 2 people. These guys are sending 10 people out at a time to apprehend a person. They're goons. They're a rogue masked agency that we don't even know if they're ICE or Border Patrol. They don't identify themselves.
Yeah, it was so interesting, their attitude towards being photographed, because it spanned the whole spectrum. There were moments where, when I got out of the car with my camera, other people would be already whistling and observing them, but as soon as they saw me with a camera, I watched, agents would put their face masks up, try to obscure their identities. There was an awareness of press, and I had an enormous press badge on the whole time, which was honestly very helpful. I think they, obviously, I'm not here to like give them flying colors for the way they treated press, but there was a practical difference when wearing that press badge about how close I could like get to police lines, and even moments where I would be behind agents while they were interacting with protesters. A thing I was really pointedly would walk up, if I was walking up to like a big line, I would like hold my camera up, my hand up, with the press badge and say, press, I'm just here, I'm doing press. Because, in my mind, like, these guys are all on edge, they're all undertrained, and it takes one, agitated goon to, like, blast a pepper ball in my eye and, like, end my career.
Sure.
Like,
sure.
So I was really cautious. And the weirdest part was if I could find them without protesters around first, there was one instance where they were in a police parking lot. They were leaving behind a vehicle with a flat tire and transferring bags. And I come up and one of them's like, get away. The other guy is like, he's just pressed, like leave him to do what he's going to do. And then they started getting curious. And like, oh, who are you shooting for? Oh, Vanity Fair. Like, are we, get my good side? And like, it's very interesting how some of them really don't want to be identified, but there are other moments where they're, I have a picture of them giving heart hands out the window, or they're taunting protesters, or where they're one of them kind of posing with his buddy. And so like, I think there's this mixed attitude within them of both like clearly some kind of shame or fear of being identified, and then also this kind of like look at me with my big guns bravado, where they want to feel that they're sort of flexing their muscle. And I think figuring out how to, it varies agent. I mean, this is the truth. It varies agent to agent. Some agents, I shoot the flash at them, especially if it's a more tense situation, and they're like, you do that one more time, we're messing you up. You go down the line, other guys don't care.
Would you not shoot him that next time?
Yeah, unless he's doing something spectacular that I just can't afford to miss. But usually it's like not worth. Again, like I think a reflection for myself on this trip was, maybe it sounds insane based on the pictures I shot, but there are times where I wish I had been bolder and wish I'd been more willing to get up in the action. I think there were a lot of unbelievably talented journalists working in Minneapolis, and I also didn't have like a military grade gas mask, which really limited me because I got tear gas. Really
is it safe to say this is the, scariest assignment you've ever put yourself on?
For sure. And I'm fairly new, but the way I would describe it too, like the first 2 or 3 nights I was there, like I was falling asleep hearing horns and whistles in my head that weren't there anymore. Like the intensity, I think that's hard to communicate to people, is like, you go to a protest in another city, like even when the protest is kind of going crazy, like here's the protest and you can leave and there's the rest of the city. But like being in a neighborhood like Whittier, like we would come home from following ICE for 5 hours and we got tear gassed, or we watched someone get detained and there was all this conflict, and you go and you try to relax, and then whether you like it or not, suddenly you hear whistles and, flashbangs 2 blocks away.
Real ones.
Real ones. And so you're just always, and that's we had all these moments where we're sitting on the couch and we're like, everyone, like, their ears perk up because, like, someone watched the wrong Instagram reel. Like, the sense of being in this sort of constant state of alertness felt really unique. And I think really speaks to, like, the experience the people in that community are having.
My friends are saying it's the most joyous and traumatizing time they've ever experienced.
100%. And that's the other part of the story that I think I was really glad the Atlantic made a point of documenting, both in Robert and Adam's pieces, was this huge emphasis on this sense of solidarity in the community. And
for sure.
It's very singular.
Well, it's like I kept on calling my friends and saying, hey, look, no pressure, but the entire world is watching you and hoping that you don't take the bait, which would be actually do something stupid. And, and they said, my friends kept on saying it really feels like they learned from George Floyd and they did not want to repeat it. And that was such a traumatizing thing for them, and such a framed Minneapolis in such a poor light, and they do not want to repeat that getting tear gas, and it seemed like what they were doing in response was whistling, throwing some snowballs, taking video, and the occasional taking photos and video, which apparently photos and video is grounds for death these days because the First Amendment is under assault. And you can probably guess where my politics lie after I go on a soapbox rant like that. But I think it's funny how liberals like myself are, for the first time, kind of up in arms, not all of them, but a lot of them that I'm around, and they find themselves more constitutionalist than they originally thought. And I think the First Amendment is something that's obviously under attack. Lemon just got arrested, Jimmy Kimmel got fired, ABC News gets sued, all these things. It's no joke, and for someone like you to be at night hitting these rogue agents with a flash at rather close proximity. I mean, I'm sure you said you wish you got closer at times. There was plenty of times you seemed rather fucking close.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, the shot that made it onto the cover of Adam Serwer's Atlantic story. This was the Wednesday after Renée had been killed, I think it's maybe a week later, and I shot someone in North Minneapolis when trying to do an abduction. And immediately, I think a couple hundred people came to the scene. And the tone is very different at night than it is during the day. I mean, it's already pretty high stakes during the day, but, there were a couple, I don't know, maybe 200-300 agents between police and ICE there. Several blocks out from the shooting had taped off streets. And I remember I pull up and it's this guy with a megaphone is just following these 5 agents, screaming at them, like, around this, the block. And I immediately hop out of the car, start like, I gotta follow this guy. And it's like, the part of the surrealness is it is like, yeah, it's full military occupation garb in front of, like, it's not suburban, it's North Minneapolis, but, like, these little houses. And I remember we go down this street and I end up, by some mistake of chance, I'm, like, staying on the sidewalk while the agents are focusing on a bunch of protesters in the street. And I end up at this intersection where there are ICE agents facing every direction, all 4 ways at the intersection, flooding every street with tear gas. And it's me and one other photojournalist sitting there like, how did they not notice us? And, but eventually they do. And, it just takes, again, like, the weird thing about it just takes one guy being pissed off and he's like, you guys need to go down that street. And the street he points down is choked every inch with tear gas. Yeah. Like, you cannot see 5 feet in front of your face. And we try to go down and I can't breathe. I can't see. And I come back and I go, can I please go down the other street that's empty? Like, I'm just a journalist. We're trying to get it. And he just points and goes, you're going down that street. And, like, with the and with the NYPD, I might have given them a little hard time and be like, hey man, like, come on, like, you're being unreasonable. This guy, it's the fucking middle of the night. He's got a fucking assault rifle, and he knows what he's telling me to do. And the sense of, like, again, like, the sense of, like, extrajudicial immunity that they have is always looming over every interaction. And so, I mean, it fries the nervous system to kind of have to read every encounter so carefully out of the fear that one of them is going to act out.
And just what do you think that is that makes you go that extra distance to get so close and vulnerable in those situations? What's your core motivation to do so?
There's that classic photography advice: if you don't like your picture, get closer. And I shoot almost everything between like 24 to 35 millimeters. Like every photo I like is always like 28 millimeters. And like, part of what was interesting about this story is so much of the identity of these agents is hiding their identity. Like so much of what this story is about it was two parts. Like the agents trying to hide their identity, and then protesters or observers or civilians were covering, feeling the need to remain private so they're not retaliated against. And so you'll see in a lot of the work I did for The Atlantic, the idea of anonymity becomes this sort of huge, I think, character in the work. And what was really compelling about getting close to the agents was there are photos that I think of, like, there's one photo of an agent, he's like getting out of his car door, but his eyes are red from his own tear gas, but it almost looks like he's about to cry. Like there's this really kind of almost like disturbed expression on his face. And so my motivation, a lot of the photos that people have responded to have been stuff like that, where I get close enough to an agent that you can start to make out the character of their emotion or lack thereof. And like the photos I took like into these cars, that like so much of a character for me in the story was like these blacked out SUVs that you get disappeared into. And so what do we as the viewer desire to see? What do we as a body politic feel that we're like in conflict with? The other picture I took was I was inside the Whipple building for one day because they held a press conference for Greg Bovino, and I was not on the list. We showed up knowing we weren't on the list, and we figured, let's just see how deep into the building we get. And they let us hang out in the lobby. And I took one, I was all these other photojournalists, and I sort of sitting in the lobby, like too nervous to take a picture of anything. Because again, like the sense is like these guys are not reasonable at all. And but there was this, the picture is, you have Trump and Vance's portrait on the wall, and it's like two agents standing there. And I was like, if I get one picture, like I want to see inside the Whipple building. And so whether it's like being inside this building or inside the car or under the mask, like this desire to access what they don't want to show us is just felt like such a strong impulse, I think. And I think there's no way to do that without getting close. And I think also the flash, obviously, beyond its like aesthetic advantages, we could have like a 2-hour-long conversation about what flash means in photojournalism. But, like it just felt, it's very revealing. And it lays really bare, and that felt appropriate. And almost everyone, not everyone, but the vast majority of people we spoke to did not want to be identified for fear of retribution or being tracked by the federal government or the people they might be delivering groceries to getting found out. There was this deep sense of needing to remain private. And so I think what I initially found a very frustrating challenge, but was ultimately really rewarding in the work, was figuring out a way to portray this community without showing anyone's face. And one of my favorite pictures that we took of community members was this shot of folks doing a nonviolence intervention training, and they're all sort of grouped in a circle. I remember someone commenting on it, like, it looks like they're praying.
I take photos with bright flash similar to yours. I mean, I'm a little biased to like your images because they are really similar to what I do, like hyper, digital flash, strobe, whatever you're using, just blast a whole scene, light up a whole scene, and reveal it in a way that our typical eye isn't accustomed to seeing. I mean, I think that's why I am always drawn to it, because it's surrealism in a way, but you can take this, like you said, we could spend 2 hours talking about the philosophical conundrums of natural light or unnatural light. And I don't believe in, personally, any of it, because it's not like the sun is completely natural in a weird philosophical way, because it's changes and it's circumstantial, and sometimes there's cloud. Like, it's just, it all ends up being the same thing, where you create an image that otherwise wouldn't be created with light that's available, whether that's on your camera or not. But there was another photographer that was taking amazing, I don't even know if he was published, but The Final Eye.
Yeah, these were nice.
Yeah, they're strong images, and they serve an incredible purpose on their own. Very different, literally one that red image is backlit versus yours, which is front lit. What does your flash provide that these images don't?
I mean, I'm really drawn to like Martin Parr is like a big inspiration of mine, or like probably the three figures that have most influenced my journalism in the last year would be like, three's hard to pick. Mark Peterson is a big inspiration. Daniel Arnold, Sina Nasseri, Martin Parr. I love what's his name? Lars Timberg is another. He's very Martin Parr-esque.
Love his stuff.
Sage Sohir, who's black and white, but also like shoots. I think a lot of her work is like 6:9 medium format Fujifilm at like f/22 with like a huge flash. And like, there's a great interview with her where she's like, I was taught my entire photography career that like you're supposed to like let the window be blown out. And I just didn't like that. So I just, did this surrealist thing where the window's perfect, but the indoors is perfect. And, I think to kind of go what you were saying, like part of my interest in doing photojournalism is I love a lot of this fine art photography that is not used in a photojournalistic context. And, they tell you to shoot what you know or shoot what, you're really drawn to. And for better or for worse, like I have an insatiable curiosity about American politics. And to me, bringing that kind of aesthetic or artistic sensibility into photojournalism was an interesting project that I don't think I'm alone in, but felt like kind of an inevitable territory for me to want to explore.
Let me ask you a question, because that artistic line between art and photojournalism and documentary, as if I don't really believe there's hard and fast lines in general. That dogma is oftentimes meant to be broken for me. If there is ever a line, I want it blurred. But with photojournalism, obviously I see a more utility to having harder and faster lines around that. Sure. But in the past, I'd say since like Vice came around, they kind of showed that having an artistic eyeball towards journalism or perceived journalism is speaking a language to an enormous audience that is exciting to me. And that's where a lot of street photographers like myself and the people that were around me are getting hired for these jobs for their artistic eye. So it goes back to this idea of like subjectivity versus objectivity. If you're an artist, you're a very subjective person that has your own viewpoint, and you're not even raising your hand and pretending to be objective. You're leaning into your subjectivity, which in the art world is encouraged, obviously, but how does that, what happens in photojournalism? How does one
walk that line?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, part of what I would argue is that like the biggest way photojournalism has changed in the last 50 years is that everyone has a camera now. And, like the thing that might be the most important, oftentimes the most viral or impactful photographs are taken on a cell phone, like the picture, or they're not, they might not be very technically masterful, or they might just be, it's a grainy cell phone video of Alex Pretti getting shot in the back.
It's utility. Pure utility.
Yeah, there's a utility to there, yes, and those images are important, and like I think there's enormously important. I think oftentimes they're framed as some kind of competition, but I think they're the fact that Alex and Renée's murders would never have been captured and spread around the world in the way they were had someone not been there with a cell phone camera. And I think
with 4 angles.
Yeah, and there's just simply no arguing in my mind the value of that. I think so. The question becomes if the material, if the simple direct information of what has happened can be captured visually by anyone, what is the role of a photojournalist, and what can we provide that is a unique or singular contribution? And so I think leaning into the idea that, I want to make work that I always joke that like my worst nightmare is someone looking at my picture and being like, that would make a great Getty image. Like, even that I would argue like the kinds of, which is no knock on Getty photography or like, and I shot wires photos for Bloomberg this past week. Like there's no knock on that, but it's to say that like, I think that I would agree with your sensibility that like, even that style of photography is a style of photography, is an aesthetic decision to present things to decide, it's funny that people think of non-flash photography as somehow more objective when for the first X number of years of photojournalism, there was nothing other than flash. Like Ouija had to use a flash. The camera technology didn't exist.
Jacob Riis's story is incredible. His flash photos is what revealed the tenement housing in New York and literally changed the laws around that, because in these dark, unlit, windowless rooms, he needed one of those giant flashes that, was a one-time use to even expose what happened. And literally people had never seen them. And those were taken to lawmakers, and they use those in courts of law to make protections around them. I mean, it's a really concrete, and they named a goddamn great beach after him for that.
my favorite beach.
My favorite beach too. And so do you feel optimistic that your images, I mean, I'm not saying you're going to get a beach named after you, but do you feel like you and the people like you that are making incremental changes? It's
ironic. I'm generally pretty pessimistic on the power of images to make political change. I think that things are kind of so vast. It's sort of, they exist in this sort of unknowable huge web. So I'm not want to give any image much credit. But something she said recently, which resonated with me, was the idea that it has not been a single image or video of Renée getting killed or Alex getting killed that has moved the thumb. It has been the relentless flood of images and videos for 6 months of ICE brutalizing communities.
Right.
That reaches this fever pitch. And I think any conversation about photojournalism and the power of images has to contends with the phone, the medium through which 80% of the world is going to consume all of this. Social media, I think, has obviously supplanted traditional news publications as the main method of communicating information. And so
it's the word of the day is really citizen journalism versus accredited journalists, or whatever you would want to call the Atlantic or the Wall Street Journal. And both have proven to be a powerhouse in very different ways. But it's worth noting that the First Amendment is literally the same thing that gives you the right to be there as the public the right to be there. We are all journalists. We are all given that right for freedom of press. And I just, if I were to want people to take away one thing from me as a person, is just to empower them that they can go into any public space and record anything they want. And people in Minneapolis are exercising that right and getting killed for it, some of them, and beat up for it. But we cannot understate the power of that. It's maybe the one last bastion of power we have as the 99.99 percenters.
That is the chosen tactic in a way of this, rebellion against ICE in Minneapolis
and it's peaceful.
Yeah, and
it's peaceful. It's a perfect medium.
Yeah, I think my interest in taking these photographs, I would hope that they are impactful. That sounds nice. I spend almost no time wondering if they are. It feels so unknowable to me. And, I think if something goes viral, cool, but even that, you don't even know what it means. I think for me, it is, to speak, it's almost a coping mechanism in a way. It is, another joke I tell is we live in the most kish, gauche empire in the history of the world. So if you're going to be around, might as well go to the circus. Going to I went to the Turning Points America Fest in Phoenix before this and photographed that. And I've been watching ICE agents tear gas people for 3 weeks. Every time I go photograph these things, I have experiences that are just so much more visceral and interesting to me than reading about them or seeing them. And my sense of what is actually happening in the country feels much more grounded. And for me, the biggest takeaway from Minneapolis is not that ICE is scary and sort of abusing this community, which is, I think, very evident. For me, the thing that I could not understand until I was there was the sense of bravery and love and community that has formed in response, and the way these people are taking care of each other, felt totally transformative and singular, and gave me a sense of being connected to reality that I don't think I would otherwise get. And so selfishly, my attraction to this work is that I have an excuse to go see what is happening in the world. And the camera is like an opportunity to do that, and then hopefully share some part of it. But the idea that any of the work, I don't think anyone's going to know what it means.
It's almost like if you go through a transformative experience with this work, it's likely somebody else will as well, and that's maybe secondary, and it's out of your control. And I understand that. Like it's like you were saying before we started this conversation, like I'm nervous, and I said to you, if you're doing something that makes you nervous, it's probably good.
Well, then the work this week was great because it was very nerve-wracking.
Well, yeah. No, I mean, if you were just like taking pictures of sunsets, which is nice, you would definitely not. I mean, if I were you, I'm projecting here, but I would not expect my sunset photos to. I guess that's not true, because if they're transformative for me, and sunsets can be transformative, I shouldn't pick on sunsets. Sunsets are very nice. This is the second time I spoke poorly about the sun. I was comparing the sun to the flash. It's like I don't know why I'm going to that, but I think I love how you said that, though, that you can hope something, but you can't really kind of like control it. You don't spend a lot of time thinking about it, because you're just that you're having transformative experiences.
There's a great interview with Gary Winogrand where he talks about when he's behind the camera, it's where he's the least himself, and I think of him as like the prototypical example of this, where like, I don't think he looked at half the stuff he shot,
No, he had a million rolls undeveloped under his bed or whatever.
Yeah. And I love, I think that he talks about that. And if you listen to like Daniel Arnold talks a lot about like, like letting the universe wink at you. I was, just a great talk, and just getting lost in process. And I think for me, the only way my experience of doing this work is that it was so high intensity and stressful that the only way I felt functional was to just be completely focused on process and completely focused on producing pictures. And I think that was you have to be obviously situationally aware when things are dangerous. But it is just such a helpful tool to return to for yourself of, okay, like, and I like what you said about being nervous. Like that was a thought I continually had, was like, I should be a little scared to take this picture. Like that is a sign that I'm doing something right. And like, there were plenty of times where I'm, 2 feet from this guy's face holding an assault rifle in the middle of like 4 clouds of tear gas. And I'm like, I'm just going to take it. Your sense of what is permissible and is not evolves over time as you're in that space. And I want to be humble enough to say that I am no expert. And I'm sure some amount of luck that I didn't flash the wrong guy who then got pissed off and threw me to the ground. Yeah. There are plenty of good journalists who had that experience. And I don't think it's anyone's fault necessarily. But
besides Pam Bondi.
Yeah. Someone's fault, maybe the person doing throwing to the ground. But, I think but yeah, I'm really drawn, like, that idea of photography as cuz you're taking, I think I took somewhere between 5,000 to 10,000 photos in the last 3 weeks, like, just the humility to be like, I can't. It's such a difficult thing that you just have to be laser focused on the process. And if you worry about its impact or this or that, I think you get, at least in the immediate term. But maybe that's the question that's more interesting over the long term. I don't know. Did
you feel like you left Minneapolis not getting anything that you wanted to get?
I didn't get a picture of Greg Bovino. That was a bummer. I got really close, but not quite. What did I not get that I wanted to get? I mean, I will say on a broader level, these stories are always a kind of a torturous exercise, and like 20 things happen a day and you can't be at all of them. Yeah. And, there were protests. I never got anything about the hotel protests because I would shoot I was usually like out the door at 8:30 and I would usually finishing editing at midnight or 2 a.m. And then I can't go shoot from midnight to 4 a.m.
Yeah. You have to figure out how to clone yourself.
Yeah. And I think, that's, like the time multiple photographers for that reason. And I think if you're the well-resourced publication, you can do that. But no, again, my attitude going into this sort of thing too is like, sure, there are like photos you want, but every single time it's a question of like, can I force myself to stay curious and open-minded about what I'm going to see? And will that, every time I get a better picture than if I had some sort of shot list that I'm just dutifully trying to fulfill. Like, again, and this is just maybe what I enjoyed about, like, a great example. My favorite photo I took was on the night they shot someone in North Minneapolis. I was forced onto the steps of this church that was adjacent to a street, so I'm probably 10 to 15 feet above the crowd, and I'm leaning around the railing of the church steps to look down into the street, and my lens is probably at like 85, 90 millimeters, and I'm holding my flash out with the other hand, and I get this group of 5 agents, guns drawn, like they all have different colored visors on, and there's one agent with this like totally enraged, psychotic look in his face, pointing his gun down the street. And like, I would never decide to shoot. Like, it was through pure like circumstance of being forced into this position I actually didn't want to be in. I was trying to avoid some tear gas on the street. I also didn't want to be in the direct line of fire of the assault rifles, and throwing my flash way farther than I wanted. But at the end of the day, like, it got this perspective where instead of having all the agents kind of stacked at the same level where I can't see their faces, you can see all 5 faces individually. And like, I shoot everything at 28 millimeters. I would never go to 90 unless I was forced to in that kind of circumstance. Mm-hmm. And it is like far and away probably my favorite shot I got, and the one that has had, I think, a lot of resonance. And it's just a great example of like, you always go in thinking how you're gonna get the best stuff. And it's always, my favorite thing about the kind of chaos of these situations is it forces you into moments where you're producing stuff that you would just never otherwise think to make. And it's the joy of, I think.
It's kind of like what you were saying before. It's not really you doing it. It's the circumstances. It's your preparedness. It's a combination of the flow state you're in. Totally. How cold it is, how freezing your hands are. Like,
oh my God, don't even get me started. The joke everyone in Minneapolis kept making was that, ice agent just kept slipping on the ice over and over again.
It was a beautiful poetry to that.
It was insanely cold, but that's fine.
Before we wrap up, is there anything else you think is worth chatting about?
I think the only other thing I would want to say is just like a real immense expression of gratitude to the people of Minneapolis, who I think are facing unimaginable stress and violence at the hands of the federal government right now. And the number of people who opened up their lives and homes to us and allowed, both expressed appreciation for the journalists on the ground doing the work and have like held each other and their community through this. Like, if there's anything I hope that the work conveys to people who have not had a chance to go to Minneapolis, it is that community is like a singular bastion of, I think, what this country can be at its finest, and that I hope we were able to do even a small amount of justice to their story. It was just very humbling.
Well said. I just to add on to that, I think it hopefully is not singular, but maybe is singular. I hope that other cities
said. For now, it's singular, but
for now, yeah. But they also are targeting it and putting the pressure on there more than other places for reasons that the cynical part of me thinks that it's because they are that singular in their ethics and their community that they are a threat to totalitarianism. And if they really were concerned about immigrants or whatever, they'd be in Texas, not in Minneapolis, which only has 130,000. So it's not a coincidence that they're being targeted right now. And all these blue cities are being targeted. It's retribution. Let's call it what it is. And so, yeah, we really need them to, unfortunately, keep fighting the good fight and not take the bait. They can't take the bait.
Yeah, I think the level of restraint exhibited by that community is really spectacular. Yes. And I think, this is not a story that I think is over, for better or for worse.
No,
and I think, the first question I was asked when I left was, are you going to Ohio? Are you going to Philly? Are you going to Maine? And while I hope I do not have to, yeah, I think this is the first chapter, and unfortunately will probably be a very long story to come.
On that note, let's leave it as a to be continued, unfortunately, but it was great talking to you and enlightening to me. And if I was transformed, we can only hope that other people have a transformative experience in this conversation too, but that's out of our control. What can we do?
I'm just happy to share the work.